Welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I'm your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, and today my special guest is Eli Shannon. It is Eli, right? That's correct pronunciation?
Yeah,
Eli.
yeah, that's perfect.
In
Yeah,
fact, you just successfully defended your PhD at Edge Hill University in Ormskirk, UK. I hope I'm saying that right.
yeah,
Is that
that's
correct?
right. Yeah,
Ormskirk?
yeah.
Now, when did you defend?
It was the 19th of November, so just a couple weeks ago,
So,
about 2 weeks ago to yesterday.
so now you got to what? Finish writing and then you're out of there?
Yeah, no, I've submitted my corrections. Yeah, it's just a matter of sort of getting it finalized, I think. So
Okay.
hopefully, yeah,
Are
hopefully
you
that goes.
applying for industry or academic jobs?
At the moment, academic, yeah.
Academic.
So trying to get something in academia, but also keeping sort of trying to really be open-minded at the moment, just in terms of positions everywhere. So pretty keen to do something. Yeah, whether that is yeah, open to pretty much a lot of things really.
In the UK, Canada, USA, New Zealand, wherever.
Prominently in the UK right now. So yeah, really, I want to make a career out of it, or at least start it in the UK. Since I've done everything here in terms of all my sort of studies. So hopefully find something, and yeah, just go from there.
Okay. Well, just a little bit about you for the audience. Eli's research focused on the effects of sodium bicarb ingestion on prolonged high-intensity exercise performance and metabolism, both normoxia and acute normobaric hypoxia. Prior to this, he completed his bachelor's degree in sport and exercise science and master's degree in exercise phys at York State John University, York, UK. And during his time in York, this is why he went to the UK, if anyone's wondering why he left Canada. He spent 4 years playing full-time soccer against professional academies at the I2I International Soccer Academy. And his research interests mainly focus on enhancing exercise performance through nutritional and physiological intervention. So, Eli, thank you for coming on this podcast. Of
Yeah, thanks
course,
for having me on.
yeah, you're welcome. Of course, you're the expert on sodium bicarb, right? I mean, ain't too many experts out there. So, so here's the question.
Yeah,
Let's see. I was familiar with sodium bicarb actually going back probably the 1980s and 90s. I'm not even sure if you were alive. So the primary issue with it obviously was GI distress.
yeah,
So I guess the first question is for your for the study you published. In fact, let me pull it up real quick here. Where's your study? In fact, I lost your study. But it dealt with sodium bicarb, and so the question
yeah.
is, what was the question you were trying to ask, and why the focus on the 40-kilometer cycling time trial specifically versus a 5K, a 10K, running the
Yeah.
400-meter track? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely a lot of different sort of reasons. Mainly, basically, was driven by sort of like if you like to say, the gap in the literature regarding like the lack of research investigating sodium bicarbonate on sort of the prolonged durations. We know its efficacy is well studied in the short, high-intensity bouts, anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes, given that those bouts, focus on sort of non-oxidative energy sources predominantly. Whereas, endurance exercise sort of gets overlooked. However, endurance exercise, such as a 40-kilometer time trial, still has sort of transient increases in non-oxidative metabolism. And there's definitely real world applications given the fact that, there may be times where you might have to outperform residual competitors, or, you have to go up a hill where, a hydrogen ion accumulation is growing like exponentially, which is how sort of bicarb's main mechanism is sort of known. In terms of like the 40-kilometer time trial, it was really trying to sort of pick a task that was reliable, validated, which there had been previous research suggesting that that would be the case. And then something, you would get people to complete in sort of like an hour or so. So that was the main sort of rationale. And then in terms of like cycling, I know you like mentioned like, the potential for like a run or whatever. Sort of like you said about my research interest, with the intervention is that like with the cycling time trial, you're able to really, collect measures as you go. You can get sort of like metabolic measures, in addition to sort of perception efforts quite easily with 95 microliter sort of blood samples, capillary samples to measure sort of bicarb and pH. So being able to do that each quartile, was definitely, that definitely was part of the reason why, I was keen to sort of investigate the 40-kilometer time trial.
Now, let me ask you this. This is sort of a sidebar, but you mentioned how, the idea that it would help certainly short events like the 400-meter track or 800-meter, where you get quite an accumulation of hydrogen ions. Um, if you look at the beta alanine literature, and we're sort of shifting a little bit away from sodium bicarb, but I'm sure you've read the beta alanine literature. Typically, what you'll see is it seems to help events, up to like, I think 240 seconds or something like that, when in fact,
Yeah,
I recommend beta alanine for sports that certainly don't fit that model. For instance, I recommend it for mixed martial arts, any of the fight sports. And I even recommend it for long distance running and cycling because of those surges. What are your thoughts
yeah.
on that?
Just thoughts on like beta alanine,
Yeah. Yeah. In terms
sort of
of for
ingestion.
the longer endurance stuff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like you said, like being able to recommend it for those sort of longer durations. If I'm not mistaken, it's an intracellular buffer, so it works on sort of like muscle carnosine. And yeah, I would definitely say, if you were to like look at the literature and look at sort of the studies that have been published, like you said, the 240-second range, well, obviously different mechanisms in terms of intracellular buffering versus extracellular buffering. But, the sense is that like, it's almost like we're oversimplifying endurance exercise in the sense
Hmm.
that, it's all steady state where
Right.
it isn't. And, essentially you're getting sort of trained athletes to come in. No one's going to be at a lactate below their thresholds or anything like that. There's going to be transient increases. So although I'm not an expert on sort of intracellular buffering with regards to beta alanine supplementation, but in terms of like the overlooking, like there would be events within sort of like a long duration time trial where the 240 seconds of high intensity would be, it would be beneficial for.
Yeah, it would be like a surge in any kind of race. Now, on
Yeah.
average in your study, how much faster were cyclists? And these were male cyclists?
Yeah, these are trained male cyclists. I think it was about, equated to like a 1.4% increase, a small effect size, and about like just under a minute, so about 54 seconds on average. So that was the mean increase or the mean improvement. Obviously, there were a couple that didn't improve, obviously, which you get with every study. And then, the majority of participants did improve. So, we're looking at, a small effect, and, I would translate that as small but meaningful. It's not going to be something that's gonna improve you by 10%, or it's not going to be, it's not like, it's only going to work. It's going to work on how hard you work. And the harder you're
Hmm.
able to work, the better that sodium bicarbonate is going to be able to help you. So, those are sort of like what you typically see with a potentially ergogenic aid for a nutritional intervention.
Yeah, I think, what'd you say it was 1.4% roughly? Improvement?
1.4, yeah,
Yeah.
1.42, I think.
I mean, there are cyclists who would die for 1.4% improvement.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
despite, I know scientists get caught up in effect size and whatnot, but in the real world, as you know, that 1.4% could mean the difference between first place and sixth place. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. I think another way you could put it is like it's for a 40-kilometer time trial, it's the difference between someone finishing above an hour and below an hour.
no, which is huge. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
well, let me ask you this: the dosing. This is always an interesting question I get in terms of dosing, and sort of the
yeah,
traditional dosing is zero point 0.3 grams per kg, I think.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
certainly most Americans don't think in grams per kg or grams per pound or
Of
anything. They just
course.
say, "Give
Yeah.
me a dose." So, I guess first, 0.3 grams per kg. Let's deal with that. What's the lowest possible effective dose in terms of grams per kg? And then the other question is, if I don't want to hear grams per kg, give me actual grams. Like, what's the lowest you
Yeah.
think? Average, let's say
Okay.
you weigh 150 pounds roughly. Yeah.
Okay. So 150 pounds, I think that would be, I'm not 100% with the conversion from kg to pound because I work in kg just because the metric
But 70
system.
kilos roughly.
70
70.
kilos,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, so 70 kilos be about 21 grams of
21 grams.
bicarb. 21 grams of sodium bicarb. If we're going to go based off of the zero point 0.3 grams per kilo, obviously if you go to zero point 0.1, that would be that'd be seven grams. So like a
Would
point.
that
So
be
if you're
effective?
going, sorry.
Would that be effective going that low?
Yeah, I mean, like, there wouldn't, I haven't seen much literature that has like looked at like point 0.1, point 0.2. Like the traditional dose is like point 0.3. However, with some, depending on some delivery types of bicarb, whether you're going to take it in solution or capsules or commercially available ingestion systems, you might still see an increase in blood bicarbonate from potentially a zero point 0.1 per zero point 0.1 gram per kilo dose.
Hmm.
But traditionally, yeah, everyone goes, 0.3 grams per kilo. It's likely to induce the best sort of acid-base balance change in blood bicarbonate and pH. Likely to get like a 5 to 6 millimole per liter increase in blood HCO3. So, if we're talking about, just playing it sort of like safe, I guess, with, if we're maximizing like the increase in blood bicarbonate, I would suggest, yeah, starting with like a point 2 to point 0.3 grams per kilo, but it's definitely not a one size fits all. Like it's different forms of bicarb have different consequences.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean like it's but if we're just talking about maximizing sort of like the potentially ergogenic effect of like increasing blood bicarb, it's likely you're gonna get the greatest raise from point 0.3 in comparison to point 0.2 and point 0.1.
Would more be better if I said, hey, I'm going to have you do 0.35 or zero point 0.4 grams per kg? Would the ergogenic effect be greater?
Um, I would say that there's no research evidence to suggest that going above zero point 0.3 would likely induce greater ergogenic effects, but it's really interesting. Like one of my sort of research interests is sort of like topping up with bicarb. So basically being able to sort of like look at sort of like, for longer duration events, is it worth sort of like, increasing blood bicarbonate through like during the race where you're going to
Mhm.
expect a drop in blood HCO3. But then you have to also think about, okay, like how are we going to sort of administer that? And the easiest way to administer that is through solution and giving like extra dosing of solution in addition to already ingested sort of capsules. You might be doing worse damage due to the potential sort of gastrointestinal side effects that you already alluded to. So yeah, in terms of like going more, I would say to choose wisely and definitely just practice with familiarity, but given the sort of sodium associated with it, it's not really. I wouldn't say it'd be wise to necessarily just go for a greater dose, but
Mhm.
definitely point 0.3 is sufficient to induce alkalosis with all different types of bicarb, from solution to capsules to commercially available ingestion systems.
Now explain there's the Morton bicarb system where and I've seen these tablets because my wife uses them.
Okay.
She's a competitive cyclist, and I'll be honest, it looks kind
Yeah.
of gross. I'm like, and it doesn't even taste that great. It's like maybe if they make this taste like candy, it'd be better. But anyways, ex explains this
Yeah.
hydrogel and what's it trying to do, and well, let's get to that first, then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, so the hydrogel delivery system was sort of used like to deliver drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, in the 1900s. And basically, Morton kind of came up with this basically being able to encapsulate sodium bicarb within like the hydrogel. The hydrogel consists of 40 grams of carbohydrates, multiple transportable, and basically 200 ml of water. And essentially, you're basically mixing this into creating a hydrogel, and you add these sodium bicarbonate mini tablets. It corresponded to sort of your weight. So,
Mhm.
they'll create like a point 0.3 and you'll basically calculate 21 grams if you're a 70 kg athlete of these mini tablets. And compose them and basically you mixed it around and essentially the company Morton recommends it from 90 to 120 minutes, which is similar to sort of like my data that suggests like, okay, like, that's their company recommendation in terms of ingestion, to gain a sufficient sort of metabolic increase in blood bicarbonate. And yeah, the passage, like to put it plain and simple, really, is that these mini tablets are delivered by the carbohydrate hydrogel, delivered and passed through to the pyloric sphincter, small intestine. And essentially, what that does is reduce the interaction with stomach acid, where the gastrointestinal upset is thought to occur following the ingestion of sodium bicarbonate in aqueous solution or in capsules, gelatin capsules. So, yeah, the main thing with this ingestion system is the sense that, okay, it reduces sort of gastrointestinal upset. Yeah, like that's one of the main sort of the benefits of it through that carbohydrate hydrogel delivery system.
So the 90 minutes to 120
120.
minutes, that's sort of the sweet spot for consuming
Yeah.
free. Now,
Yeah, 90 to 120 minutes. I mean, I think when because I in the study that you referenced earlier, with my studies that like, I took pharmacokinetic data at rest, so I looked at the time to peak
Mhm.
from sodium bicarbonate, where basically participants came in, these cyclists came in, they sat at rest for 3 hours basically. And essentially, just they ingest the Morton bicarb system, and you basically just take blood samples every 10 minutes to see where the highest peak of blood bicarbonate is in the blood. And yeah, like there's variability, but generally speaking, you're gonna get like a sizable increase in blood HCO3 from 90 to
Wait,
120
wait,
minutes.
you're taking blood samples every 10 minutes?
Every 10 minutes, yeah. Every
How
just
did you get
capillary
people to
samples.
volunteer for that?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it was just capillary samples. It wasn't venous puncture, but capillary samples, yeah. It can be, yeah, I'm very thankful for all the volunteers, thankful for the participants. Wouldn't have been able to really be done without them. But
Wait, that's finger
yeah,
prick? It's via finger
yeah,
prick?
finger prick. Yeah, it
That's
wasn't venous
that
puncture.
still hurts like hell.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean, like, look, like that 90 to 120 minute, it's essentially what that does is it just reduces it increases the feasibility, right? So it increases the feasibility of the ingestion system. You're not likely to get that with aqueous solution or other capsules, other gastro-resistant or gelatin vegetarian capsules, because the
Mhm.
inter-individual variability for the peak responses using those capsules and aqueous solution it's a lot more finite. So essentially like it might be worth, really doing like your time to peak measures for your different forms of bicarb. Whereas what we saw with this, the hydrogel system is that like, okay, yeah, maybe they won't get like a 5 millimole per liter increase from the 90 to 120. It might be 4.5 millimole per liter increase,
Mhm.
but especially with endurance exercise, like from what we saw, like with the blood data during the time trial, is that it stays relatively elevated anyway. So it'll take a drop in the first 10 kilometers, which is usually associated with like a lot of power already used by the cyclists, because the cyclists will always start off relatively quick in
Mhm.
comparison to other parts of the time trial with the pacing strategy. That's when you'd see the biggest dip in sort of your blood bicarbonate, blood pH. But then it sort of increases throughout the time trial during like the middle phases. And then at the end of the time trial, in the last 10 kilometers, it'll go down the most. So, in terms of like the blood bicarbonate bioavailability, like it's suggesting that like that 90 to 120, like it really, it's just to get a metabolic increase, sufficient increase, whether that's between 5 or a little bit below. It's really more contingent on how it stays elevated throughout the time
Mhm.
trial.
No, I noticed in your study, I was looking at the individual data points, which is really cool. I like to see individual data points.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
the total time, I noticed, let's see, there looks like there's a couple people who sort of stagnated.
Mhm.
One person seemed to decrease in performance. Sort,
Yeah.
yeah, sort of looked like they did. There's always this issue of responders and non-responders, and I've always thought, I think everyone responds eventually. It's just a matter, I don't know if it's a matter of dosing. Maybe it's just this person wasn't motivated. I don't know. But what are
Yeah,
your thoughts
yeah.
on this responder, non-responder issue?
Yeah, I mean it's quite a topic really. Like I said previously, I feel like with any study, there's always going to be a few people that don't necessarily respond or, have an ergolytic effect. But yeah, it actually came up in my Viva. I think there was like I had these individual pharmacokinetic data points, and essentially what I did from that data is I looked at sort of like how long does the blood stay elevated for above 5 millimoles per liter. And there was one participant that stayed elevated for sort of like, only 10 minutes or something.
Oh,
How
interesting.
can that person have a potentially ergogenic effect if it's only staying elevated for 10 minutes? But in comparison, where some people stay elevated for way longer, prolonged period of time. But in terms of, yeah, like the responders and non-responders, yeah, I mean, like you said, like you alluded to, like motivation, it's trying to keep everything, trying to control the controllables with doing these types of studies. But like there's definitely possibilities that there are like specifically with sodium bicarbonate, especially with those that get, in my study, there weren't a ton of like GI upset. Like it was relatively quite similar between the placebo condition and the bicarb condition,
Mhm.
in terms of like, which, it's such a hard thing to measure because there's different factors with regards to GI upset. We can go down the list in terms of anxiety, in terms of the actual familiarity with the hydrogel, like training with the hydrogel, the gut training. So you can't really even pin it down to, okay, is it actually like the bicarb or not, which it likely isn't, in terms of that GI upset. But with the traditional forms of bicarb, when we're looking at like solution form, if we're looking at like capsules where like they interact with stomach, some of those non-responders that potentially get an ergolytic effect, it might be related to sort of like potentially like a genetic sort of variation where some
Hmm.
people are just more susceptible to GI upset. So in terms of non-responders, that's probably what I would like say regarding different, but it could be due to anything, until like it's very difficult to run a controlled study and control absolutely everything. But yeah, it's just you do the best you can, really.
Well, I applaud you for getting someone to do a 48K time trial twice. because just recruiting subjects, knowing that they have to do that, it's insanely, I don't know what it's like there, but here it's insanely hard because
Yeah, it was
part
extremely
of,
difficult, extremely
yeah,
difficult.
it's a
Yeah.
lot of it is they're like, well, you're just going to ruin my training. I mean, why would I
Yeah.
do this for you when I have to train, for my race or whatever? But anyways,
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
pragmatic
exactly.
question. If you have two races in one day, let's say you're doing both a 5K and 10K time trial cycling or whatever, pick
Okay.
whatever sport.
Yeah.
And the races are 3 hours apart.
Okay.
Obviously, you can do sodium bicarb before the first race because you would. Would you do it
Yeah.
before the second race, or what would the strategy be when you have two races in one day, or multiple heats in one day?
It's really interesting you said that. Yeah. I was actually talking to someone in Germany that was like a swim coach or like helping out with like the German swimming team during the Olympics, and he was telling me his strategy, and essentially what he was doing was like loading up with bicarb prior to the first race, but then obviously you want to give them enough bicarb so they get to the final, or they get from the semis to the finals.
Right.
And anecdotally, like the report was that like he was giving them bicarb, but not equaling the whole zero point 0.3 dose, but prior
Mhm.
to the semi. And then, hopefully that person gets to the final. And then in between the semi and the final, give them the last bit of top up because it's likely to recover as well. Like your blood bicarbonate is likely to recover to sort of like those in comparison to if you weren't to take bicarb. So there's been some studies that have looked at sort of like the recovery aspect. So I think in one of the other Morton sort of papers, they did the 4 kilometer repeated trials, and then they did a 4 kilometer time trial. They waited 45 minutes, and their blood bicarb almost returned back to where it was pre-exercise. So I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that you need to go over the zero point 0.3. It might just
Mhm.
be about potentially taking at least maybe 2/3 of that dose prior to exercise because we've seen performance increases or performance benefits from zero point 0.2 dose, and
Mhm.
then potentially topping up with the zero point 0.1 in between the semis and the finals. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. You just have to consider all things regarding potential GI upset, potentially, and then yeah, you want to make the final as well. So
Right.
yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Okay, so zero point 0.2 grams per kilo first race, maybe zero point 0.1 grams per kilo second
Yeah,
race.
potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Just not exceeding, the zero point 0.3. Not saying that if you do exceed it, it's gonna make it that much worse or anything. It's just that, yeah, like that would be a typical sort of bloating strategy.
If GI distress is not an issue, let's say,
Yeah.
this athlete's like, I can, eat cardboard and I don't have problems. So
Yeah.
would it be wise to do zero point 0.3 grams per kilo? Because you want to do well initially. It would suck if you
Mhm.
lowered the dose, you didn't do quite as well. So if you did zero point 0.3 grams initially, then maybe zero point 0.1 before the second one, or does that?
It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, like starting off with point 0.3, and then like doing a point 0.1 potentially after. Um, Obviously you have to also consider the potential sodium increase as well. Like you wouldn't want to be doing that like every single, but if it's like say like the Olympics or say if it's trials and it's like, a big sort of and you're like, if you're familiar with it, to do point 0.3 and then a plus point 0.1 after. Yeah, I mean, like I would definitely suggest that that could be a viable option. Yeah, because like you said, you have to get there first. And yeah, like you said, if the GI upset isn't an issue and they're taking it in potentially a gastro-resistant form, yeah, I wouldn't say that that would be necessarily a bad thing to do.
What would there be issues with, because you're consuming a lot of sodium? If you're
Yeah,
competing in hot weather like Florida, it's hot, so you're sweating a lot, versus competing
exactly.
in Canada where it's not hot. So how
Yeah.
would you deal with that?
Yeah, so obviously like the hydration as well, the fluid retention, those are all things to consider. I know there's been some sort of evidence, yeah, definitely like looking at potential hydration status and hyperhydration potential with bicarb in the heat. Um, yeah, I mean, you'd have to definitely consider all of those sort of risks and seeing like how what your body weight is as well with regards to sort of the sort of like how that looks, like how much fluid are you actually like retaining. Yeah, I would say I wouldn't suggest like I would suggest that there isn't enough literature to suggest one way or the other in terms of like those extreme sort of extreme environments. But yeah, it's definitely something to take into account.
Do you think all that sodium could be an issue at all? I mean, because it's a bucket full of sodium.
Yeah, definitely an issue. Definitely it can be. You know, this isn't something to like, sodium bicarb itself. It's not something to ingest every day. I think Morton actually suggests you only have it like twice a week or something if you're going to use it for training. So I think, yeah, like using it for performances, using it for important competition, but also familiarizing itself with it prior to competition as well to avoid any of those potential adverse sort of like situations. So essentially, yeah, like, that is like, a large consumption of sodium associated with each zero point 0.3 grams per kilo dose. And that's like sort of like the ethical or like the issue with potentially topping up as well, the
Mhm.
increased sodium associated with it. It just depends on how much you're actually using it. Like if you're using it in training, for potentially increasing training adaptations, if you're using it just in performance, yeah, so it's definitely something to consider.
Okay. Last question. This one's kind of a funny one because there have been a lot of knockoff products of which fly carb is
Yeah.
one of them. It's it's funny. Fly carb on Instagram, they're always talking about how their product it decreases lactic acid, and I always give them a hard time. I get on there I DM them. I'm like, "What the hell are you guys talking about this lactic acid stuff?" And they say, "This is what they say." They're like, "Well, our consumers like that word, so this is the word we use." So,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
do you think of that?
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, it's so debunked, the lactic acid sort of, term. They thought in frog mussels or amphibians, and ever since then, it's just this sort of concept, and it's really unfortunate listening to. I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but in the UK, like a lot of like when there's swimming championships, like the swimming trials, the world championships, if there's track and field or if there's, they're saying like, oh, they're flushing out the lactic acid, they're flushing it. It's just, it's not, we know that, when you're I would say this, like we know when you're exercising, when you're pushing hard, you're creating lactate, you're creating hydrogen ion accumulation in the muscle. Although we know that both hydrogen ions and lactate have a positive linear relationship in terms of their correlation between the two sort of the proton and the anion. However, we also know that lactate is now used as oxidizable substrate and can be used as a fuel intermediary for other important organs in the body. So in terms of, yeah, the lactic acid, I mean, like maybe it's a selling point to some sort of consumers that like to buy the products, and if that's like a selling point, then fair play. But scientifically, it's incorrect.
Yeah, it's just hilarious that the word lactic acid has been thrown around really for the last half century, and it never
Yeah,
seems to die. So
yeah.
I always get a good chuckle when I see these ads. I'm like, what's wrong with you guys over at Fly Carb? And they must hate me because I keep giving them a hard time. At least Morton doesn't do it. They don't do the lactic acid.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't yeah, no, exactly.
Well, Eli, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. Hey, if you're ever in the States, if you're ever in South Florida, look me up. I mean, it's perfect weather here all year. So if you want to escape the gray clouds and the cold weather, South Florida is it.
Yeah.
And if you ever want to present at ISSN, we hold our national conference every middle of June, and it's always in South Florida. So you could work on your tan, you could talk science, have a beer, whatever. I'm sure you'd enjoy it. Um,
That sounds great. Yeah, I
yeah.
appreciate it.
So thank you. Hey, congrats on finishing your PhD, and thank you for appearing on the show. I'll have this uploaded probably in a day or so, and I will send you an email letting you know.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
All right, thanks, Eli.